Thank you. Yes, I chair Action Groups Against High Speed 2, which is 75 organisations that specifically exist to oppose HS2 and to promote the better alternatives. And I guess I want to just introduce the business case by answering two questions. First of all, do we actually need HS2? Whether we like it or not, we're running out of capacity, we have to have it. And the other question is, regardless of that, do we want it because there are all kinds of benefits that we can get as a result of HS2? So do we need it? And the answer is categorically no. Even if demand grows at the heroic rate expected by HS2, bearing in mind that long-distance domestic travel per person has been static for the last 15 years, we can double the capacity of the three main lines, the East Coast Main Line, the West Coast Main Line and the Midland Main Line, three main lines affected. We can double the capacity before we even start on infrastructure changes. And if we need additional capacity, there are 7 pinch points identified by Rail Package 2, the government's own alternative, and according to the government's own figures, Rail Package 2 gives a 151% increase in capacity and leaves trains less crowded than on HS2, 51% load factor instead of a 58% load factor. In fact, when or if HS2 Phase 1 opens, Manchester will have less seats than they do at present, so it will be more congested than at present. This approach of developing the assets that we've already invested a lot of effort and billions of pounds in so that they can be used effectively, this approach is quicker. We can deal with capacity issues where they do exist much more quickly and is much cheaper, and is something you can do incrementally in line with demand. And when you're working towards, for the next decades, we don't know how demand will change. And I think that's really important because increasingly a partial alternative is use of the internet. Just in the last year I've started to use Skype generally to replace one-to-one meetings, and I've started to use webinars. Look ahead a few decades and that will make a massive impact on how we use transport. So it's important to be incremental, to be able to build up capacity in line with demand. So we don't need it, but do we want it? Because it has some other benefits. Speed is the obvious one. Well, I travel to London fairly regularly and I tend to use the Chiltern line, which is not the fastest, but it's about £100 cheaper than Virgin for the kind of times that I go. And the reason why I do that is that I use my time very productively on the train. I can plug in my laptop and I can use that time productively. It's certainly not worth spending £500 million minutes saved on a journey to Birmingham. And in many cases, the difference in time is not that great when you allow particularly the connection times, because the route Phase 1 goes to Curzon Street in Birmingham. If you want to get another train, you have to move to New Street. That will take you most of the time savings you've made. If you want to get to Birmingham Airport, you go to an interchange and then have to get a monorail. By the way, no one knows who's paying for that, but there'll be a passenger transport system apparently. And when the Y opens in 21 years, the HS2 service to Newcastle will be 2 hours 37 minutes, say the government. Terrific. That is exactly the same time to the minute of what East Coast Main Line say that they will achieve later this year. So there's no time savings for Newcastle whatsoever. So marginal benefit on speed. Economics, the current claim is that there's £44 billion worth of benefit, down from over 70 billion last year, falling rapidly. More than half of that comes from the erroneous belief that time is unproductive on trains, which, as I've just said, is actually not the case. And I'm sure we all know time can be used productively on trains, and the Department of Transport have now admitted that, but they haven't changed their figures. And of course that changed the whole model. If time isn't so important in terms of benefits, we need to have a fresh look at speed and a fresh look at routes. So the 44 billion is overstated. We think it's actually 19 billion. There's also much talk about 40,000 jobs. Terrific. 30,000 of those are regeneration jobs, which means primarily shifting of jobs from one place to another. This is shopping centres around stations, so they're not really new jobs. And of those 30,000, 73% will be in London. So all the talk about north-south divide is rubbish. It will do nothing to improve the north-south divide. And the proof of the pudding is HS1, the high-speed route that runs through Ashford, which is running at 1/3 of the forecast demand, 7 million passengers a year instead of 21 million. It's cost the taxpayers billions, and the local commuters are up in arms because of the cutbacks to the regular services and more crowding on regular services. In conclusion, DfT have been fiddling the figures. They've made wrong assumptions, they're using a wrong model 2 years out of date, which would dramatically decrease their benefit figures. They're using wrong income figures, which inflate the benefits. And they've had to extend the forecast for 10 years. Well, why is that? Because the economic case would collapse if they hadn't done that. So it now goes to 2043. Even the technology doesn't stack up, because HS2 includes train paths at 18 trains an hour, and that, according to the European authority, the UIC, is impossible. You cannot do 18 trains an hour with current technology. Meanwhile, the DfT have tried to bury their own alternative, and even very recently sneaked in cost increases for Rail Package 2, for example by putting in the same optimism bias as HS2. Optimism bias is when you allow for the uncertainties of new technology and things that haven't been specified and ordered fully. So they have the same optimism bias for operating costs, 41%, on HS2 as the operating costs for the West Coast Main Line, which is known. Similarly, same optimism bias for purchasing pendolinos, which are pretty much off the shelf, as for buying new HS2 trains. So we're in a ludicrous position where the DfT want to spend £33 billion to subsidise transport for a few mainly wealthy people, and to increase the number of journeys, which doesn't sound very green, and to switch people from relatively low carbon classic rail to relatively high carbon HS2. HS2 is a scandal. The Department of Transport are trying to pull the wool over our eyes, and that's why I think everyone should have an audacious goal for the year. And my audacious goal for this year is to attempt to save the government a net 15 billion. Thank you.